So, for my personal project, since I was, well, there's no real excuse for it, but I was a bit busy between both of your classes and Ed's class. So, I'll be the first to admit that my individual project leaves a lot to be desired. The basic thing that I added in terms of my personal project is I added sound, because I feel like sound is something that breathes a little bit of extra life into the game that basically wasn't there before. So as you can hear in the background right now, the title for the actual game is playing right now. The song is just a song that I was able to get without royalties or anything, but pressing enter on the screen allows me to go through the various stages. The music terminates once the scene switches because I chose for it to. All this is done using Erklang. When the player moves, you can hear them doing their footsteps through this marsh. In the background, you can also hear rain. If you press the space button, you can hear bullets being fired. And that basically covers the sound. In order to do this, I did have to add Erklang into Visual Studios. Here's all of Erklang's stuff. Here's Erklang's DLLs. But on top of that, I needed to make it easy for the user to work through their code. So the very first thing was to create a sound manager, a way to load in sounds and place them correctly. So adding a sound manager, I ended up in the assets folder, there's now a music folder. And in the music folder, we have different types of sounds. These first few, I think, are WAV files, and this other one is an MP3. And I'm able to load all these sounds into the manager. And the manager is responsible for deleting all those entities and going through everything. So I do have a debug message out. So I create a sound manager, which is here. So on creation, we create a sound manager and we create an Erklang device. From there, we are able to load sounds. And in loading sounds, we basically add them to our map and we add the sound source from file. And later on, we take this sound source and we'll call it when need be. So when we play the sound, we take that sound source right here, and we place it here. So we use that sound source, and what we end up doing is, if we're looping, so if we want it to be looped, what we first do is we declare it to be looped and we pause it for a second. And we do this because we want to constantly maintain this pointer. For some weird reason, if an object is looped, and if I did not save the pointer that's returned after this Erklang iSound pointer, there would be no way to terminate this song. So I save that into another array, given the name of the sound, and I can stop the sound later on. It's important that you always stop and then drop it. This is automatically done if the song is not looped, because as soon as it's finished, it will be stopped and dropped. The very last thing after it's dropped, of course, is that you set that spot into a null pointer, so that way if you call it again, you can pull this back up again. So this is a very important thing that's also somewhere in the documentation, that you can't call a loop song twice. In either way, that wouldn't sound very, very good to begin with. because it would just mess with this entire process. But I wasn't able to find another way to do it. I was thinking about implementing it in terms of a linked list, but then I would constantly have to have the user be responsible for calling delete on that, and or I would have to have the user save that pointer and remember to call it back when they need to. And in the end, it was just simpler to just provide the restriction on the user because I'm working in the constraints of Erklang. So that way they just give me the string of the song that they want to stop, and then I stop it for them. Ultimately, the last thing I do with the sound manager is at the very end, when I'm about to end my sound manager, I stop all the sounds that are currently playing. I remove all the sound sources. I drop it, and since everything is done, I clear my maps. I clear the songs. I clear basically my sound sources. I do not have to delete these because Erklang is responsible for these. And I clear my map of sounds. I also don't have to worry about this because once all sounds are stopped, Erklang was responsible for that. And I also give the user the ability to pull a song if they're playing it. This generally isn't used for right now, but I wanted to leave the implementation there just in case the user wanted it. If I had more time, I really would have wanted to mess with 3D sound and basically work on a type of interface, maybe through just simple keys to just increase and decrease volume. Right now, the volume just blows to 100, puncturing eardrums wherever possible. And that's why if you're going to play my game, Andre, I do advise that you set the volume all the way to 0 if possible. You say that you want a self-reflection for what I've learned. I learned that if you want to implement something that someone else has already created, like this sound manager built off Erklang, you have to go through a lot of documentation. You have to make sure you're not deleting pointers that you don't rightfully own. And it reminds me a lot of how I had to change my mindset for Box 2D, where I never own any of the bodies, and in this case, I don't own any of the sounds. I just have temporary pointers that I use to call back to Erklang and just say, hey, I want you to get rid of this. I want you to drop this. So it is a different programming mindset. Honestly, this wasn't too difficult. I didn't do much for it. But I'm thankful that I was at least able to learn this additionally through the physics class, because without that, this would have been a very different world to me, because I've never worked on an engine where I had to take someone else's engine and include it into mine. I can't imagine this would be any different than if I have like a physics engine like Havoc and I'm including it into this 3D game. I would have to do the same thing. I would have to set up my own managers, my simple coding styles to make things simpler for the user. I would have to apply restrictions, like I said, about the about stopping sounds and playing sounds on a loop. I don't pay much for performance. That's the second bullet point, mainly because I know Erklang works using a lot of like mutex and threading. So everything is done on a separate thread. So given modern CPUs, playing sound really doesn't cost anything in terms of performance. Maybe playing 100,000 sounds would, but I don't really pay for anything here. Like I said, that basically covers my personal project. I honestly wish I could have done more for it, but I'm turning in what I got.